Moorish history. Okay, I got a message right now. Okay, so
I'm here. The video left. What?
You just have to click the start video button if you want your video to show. There you go.
Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. Yeah, if you want me to read it verbatim, I can.
Either is fine if you want to read it verbatim, or if you like to rephrase it or just go off the top of your head, however you feel comfortable.
No, that's cool. I want to thank you guys again for inviting me into this. I know I'm not a Moor. Most of my understanding of Moorish history is from like long ago history. So my question was, so Jewish people proclaimed Israel was their land for the longest time. And they backed it up with biblical text and whatever other texts and scrolls that the Vatican is hiding in their libraries. My question is, so the Moor Empire spread amongst the world. What was the more central location when they were at their strongest? And that's my first question. And I'll mute my mic.
Islam.
Go ahead, Sheikh, you got the floor.
Islam. Their strongest stronghold, depending on the time period, the most recent time was the north and southwestern shores of Africa. You had the area before was called Morocco was called Mauritania. This is where you had the stronghold in the library and the University of Timbuktu. Because around about this time, this is after the Ptolemaic period of Egypt, where Egypt had fell, and then the Islamic republics and the Islamic areas of mid-Africa and North Africa started to flourish. But their strong point, their naval power, which was the superpower at that time, came from the north and southwestern shores of Africa. Islam.
Yeah, so I don't know if that suffices to answer your first question, or if you would like a little more information on that particular subject. But I'm pretty much.
It does make sense that there was a lot going on in the Med back then, so it makes sense that their central location would be somewhere near the Mediterranean. That makes a lot of sense. Like, how do you spread an empire without transportation? That makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, Steve, the floor is yours. If you have any other questions, we could continue.
No, I did have another one. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to jump in on that, that particular question, but I do have another one if we want to move on.
Well, it's up to you, Sheiks. Do you guys have any?
You said she's want to add on.
Well, yeah, he said this if you're satisfied. If you want more detail, we can go into more detail. It's pretty much up to you.
Nah,
you just gave you a real brief synopsis.
Okay, yeah, no. That's pretty brief. No, it makes sense. And then my other question I had, right? So again, it's kind of touching on the Are We Black topic again. So, Europe and mostly like Germanic Viking tribes, the Norwegian, Swedish, Germans, Finnish, they went from worshiping trees, the sun, the pagan gods that they had, from making homes made out of wood and thatched roofs, pretty much sticks and leaves. That's what the roofs were made out of. In a short amount of time, to making their homes made out of stone, international roadways, properly built temples, vessels that could travel and map the seas. So obviously there was an outside influence that taught them this stuff. And the Moorish Empire, right, is known for spreading throughout Europe and teaching architect, mathematics, sciences, medicinal advancements. So if the Moorish Empire did all that, the natives had to have bought in, right? Back then, people were burned at the stake or drowned for witchcraft and stuff. So if the Moorish Empire came in and got them to buy into these things, right, they had to assimilate. So if they did, how come they're not considered Moors if they bought in and let these leaders teach their people these new advancements?
Yeah,
That's actually a great question. Oh, go ahead, Grant Sheep. I'll yield it to you.
yeah. All right. So during that time when Europe was in their dark ages and began to develop civilization, um, you had a lot of the Moors who came into Europe. They were a part of a group who were known as the Pure Sufis, and they began to um initiate Europeans into the ancient Arab order of the Noble of the Mystic Shrine, and they became known as the Sons of the Moor. The word um um Mason means son of a Moor. So when they were under the study or teachings of the Moors, they studied 35 to 50 years, and they was able to be called the son of a Moor, and they was received this education and degrees. And this goes along with the Templars and so forth. And this mystic order was come from the Aleph-Bet, which was from the House of Ali. And when they begin to teach them what they call speculative and operative masonry. So you have speculative masonry when you're dealing with the symbols of the compass and the square, and operative masonry when you're dealing with the actual building of the temple or building of these different temples, which was the symbolic meaning of building up your character. And it's the way the Moors began to bring the Europeans from a dead level to living perpendicular on the square. And they would become known as Muslim sons or Moor, or the sons of the Moors, and they were able to wear the fez, but they would have to bound their tassel down because they only got 33 degrees, in that the Moors were able to have their tassel free. And they were able to wear the crescent moon with the sword on the top because it represented the subjection of the Moabite or Moorish woman. So this is how the European became educated and became a part of our educational system. So yes, and if they had, bear witness that there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is his messenger, and was a Muslim son, they will be treated under protection and immunities of the Moors. So you had European nations that were within the Moorish Empire who studied under the Moors, who became the sons of the Moors and had protection under the Moorish Empire through the sultans.
Okay, yeah, I'm with that. That makes sense. And moving a couple thousand years ahead of that, into American history, right? So Masonry and those teachings still go on today, right? And even our first president was also a Mason, right? A 33rd degree Mason, George Washington.
Yes,
So he was building our nation based on teachings of the Moors.
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
You can add them here.
So we're gonna go back to the period that we were just discussing and go back to what you're talking about with the modern education and all that, and the relationship between the Moors and the European descendants. So when you look at the things that you were discussing, the building of the structures, from the very crude structures made of straw and wood, like sticks and mud, that the Germanic tribes were living under, in their particular customs that they had adopted prior to those Germanic tribes forming themselves into what they call the Scandinavian nations. So in this particular time, there were Moors of nobility in Europe. So when we're talking about that, what we call it the Dark Ages, or Europe's Dark Ages period, prior to the period of Enlightenment, which is what you're discussing about, this rapid knowledge and science and technology and things of that nature. This was the Moors introducing the Europeans to this knowledge. What evidence do we have of this? Even evidence of simple language. You go to a college institution anywhere around the world, right? and you take a course called algebra. Well, where does this word algebra come from? It comes from the Arabic. What is Arabic? Arabic is a Moorish language. Because mathematics, science, where was the center of learning on the planet Earth? Was the whole world in the Dark Ages? No. It was Europe that was in the Dark Ages in terms of knowledge and understanding. So in this particular time, prior to 711 AD and the Moors conquering or defeating the Visigoths on the shores of on the shores of Spain and, you know, spreading throughout Southern Europe. If we even talking about prior to that period, the center of learning was what the Sheikh Muhammad had explained earlier, Timbuktu. In Timbuktu, it was in Africa. So this is the center of learning for the planet Earth at this time, where all knowledge of science, medicine, mathematics, all the innovations of civilization were in the heart of Africa at this particular time. And then when the Moors began to flourish in Spain, which at that time was called Al-Andalus, the center of learning was in this particular region, what we call Al-Andalus. And so you have the Moorish expulsion after what's called the Reconquista that took place in 1492. And when many of the Moors that were expelled, this is when Spain went into decline, because all that knowledge of science and mathematics and technology, you know, who's developing the irrigation systems and maintaining agriculture and according to, you know, astrology, et cetera, et cetera. This knowledge was with the Moors, and when they expelled them, Spain went into decline, and they didn't get wealth again until they came into Americas. But I digress. So the Moors that remained were the ones who educated the Europeans. So many of the greatest educational institutions throughout Europe today, like Oxford and places like this, were originally, the original educators in those institutions were Moors. Like even when you talk about Christopher Columbus setting sail, and he's supposed to be the discoverer of the New World, you know, at least in, you know, modern American educational history. When he gets here, who led him here? Who is his navigator? Because your navigator is the person who gets you where you gotta go. It was a Moor, literally. If you look him up, his name is Alonso Pinzon. He was a Moor. So there are understandings that the Moors were, through their Canaanite ancestry, leading up to the people who known as the Phoenicians, were the masters of the seven seas, circumnavigating the planet for thousands of years. And this technology was introduced to Europeans, as well as during the what they call the bubonic plague, the Black Death. It was the Moors who built bathhouses throughout Europe, hundreds of bathhouses, and taught Europeans the relationship between health and hygiene. In the way that we're doing this quarantine, or they come in today with the hazmat suits and, you know, spray people down and stuff like, this is what the Moors did in this particular period to prevent a mass, you know, death among European people. So it was
absolutely. I'm totally in agreement with that. The far other Europeans, Spanish, French, Great Britain, and all that, yeah, they didn't bathe regularly. The Germanic tribes did pride themselves on bathing regularly, and that was even when they worshipped the sun and trees and stuff like that. That was just the
forgive me for lumping everybody in one category, but I'm just trying to give the.
But no, absolutely, yeah. The other side of Europe, no, they did not do that, and that's well known that they didn't. People mistake the fact that they had nappy hair to them having dreads. Like, no, they didn't have dreads. They just weren't bathed people. And Great Britain, you know, to include Ireland and all of that. Ireland, you know, went through multiple famines because they didn't know how to do agriculture right. And then eventually what happened, like spontaneously, like now they're a great agricultural nation. How did that happen? Obviously, someone came in and stepped in.
Well, that's what I was going to kind of get into. some say it was aliens and stuff like. No, it was the Moorish influence in Europe. This science was already known for tens of thousands of years in terms of agriculture, stuff like that. It was introduced, and this is where the Enlightenment. So we have the Enlightenment period, and you have all these great philosophers and teachers and mathematicians and astronomers, et cetera, et cetera. They were students of Moors. So that's getting into the connection between the Muslim sons and the degrees that were imparted. These degrees of civilization were imparted to the European during this particular period, known as the Enlightenment. And then it was your forefathers who implemented those teachings and began to build from that period on. But a lot of the castles prior to this particular period that are throughout Europe, these ancient castles, were actually Moorish castles, because there's not a portion of the planet Earth that wasn't originally inhabited by the dark-skinned, woolly-haired people of the Earth. So many of that's where the as I was explaining to you, the family crest with the dark-skinned people throughout Europe. When you trace the names and stuff like that, when you look up a lot of the meanings of the names and the history and all that, that's because those Moors were already there. They had those royal bloodlines and living in those castles, and at some point or period, they were no longer the dominant people in society, if you will.
I think Muhammad wanted to say something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Sorry about that. Yeah, Sheikh Muhammad, you did say Islam.
Islam, peace. I just wanted to state, you see this dichotomy through different times. At the end of the Dark Ages, you have the Renaissance period. And this is being birthed by all the sciences developing in Al-Andalus, throughout Andalusia, all throughout the Iberian Peninsula. When we are talking about the Dark Ages, to be anthropologically correct, it would be Western Europe. And as you can see, you have as you mentioned, you had the first president of the United States of America, George Washington. As you see, he had an adept teacher with him, which was Benjamin Franklin, who was under the study of an adept master, who was Benjamin Banneker, or also known as Benjamin Banneker Bay. And if you look in the Library of Congress, you will see a black fez with a red tassel, and it has on it Ben Bay in reverence to him. Islam.
Okay. No, I was just curious as to how deep the Moorish culture went from, like, what, 1600 years ago, 1300 years ago to today. Because I saw today your guys' debate was about American Moorish culture and re-adapting, I guess, the culture and re-influencing people to follow the culture of being more. So that was kind of some of my questions. Is like, okay, so if you got people to buy in back in the day, right, that were not of your culture at all or your skin color, obviously I'm a white man. It was just, are they considered Moors if they're not historically or by heritage a Moor? Like, how do you guys tell someone that, hey man, you're a Moor, but you don't know that they have a historical connection to being a Moor?
Right. So
It's
I'm sorry, Sheikh Muhammad. You could go ahead. I'll go ahead.
All right, Islam. So the culture, all the cultures of the world come from these one people. So there's a difference between the cultures of the Moors being adopted and then the actually genetics of the Moors being adopted. So even though there was a mixing of certain people, when you look at certain time periods, you can see that there was a difference between the originators of the culture and then the adopters of the culture. And you can see this throughout time. We focus in Western philosophy or Western culture, we focus on the Dark Ages, but this wasn't the first time this happened. This happened during the time of Al-Hazan before the Renaissance. This happened during the time of Taharqa and his travels to the Iberian Peninsula. So wherever you see culture develop, or you see an area go from nomadic tribes or bands and clans and then develop to a metropolis where it could have a sustainability through different arts and education, this is where you see the mark of the Moors. where that part or where that culture or that society benefited from being introduced into those ancient sciences by these people. Islam.
So, if I may, so what you're saying is, again, you look at history, and you just see like this gap, right? So for so many thousand years, like they made houses made out of what, mud or sticks and whatever, and then there's just this huge jump in technological advancement. Um, are you saying that that's when the Moors stepped in, probably in history, and it's not taught, you know,
Well,
the like
it
great
was prior to
outside
that.
influence came here, and it's like, hey, we went from this, and somehow we jumped up to this. Now we have schools, we have education, colleges, we have stone roadways. Houses are made of stone now to protect against natural disasters, irrigation, a whole bunch of other things. Is that Moorish education that taught these countries to like just somehow just go from like here to like jump up to like here, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of. Well, let me get this real quick, Mo. Just to make it real practical for you, Steve. You do it today, right? You have United States of America, right? They'll go to a place that we will refer to geopolitically as a third world country, right? And we will go into that country and we will teach them things. We will build schools out there, right? We will help develop their infrastructure in terms of their roads and their irrigation systems and all of these things. And we'll teach them how to maintain these kinds of things and whatever have you. Mind you, many European nations went into a great amount of debt to the Moors historically and were paying tribute. So the same thing that we do today was done in ancient times, although it may seem impractical, just to try to give you a modern understanding of how that could be. So you come in contact with this civilization of people. They have these things for trade, and for the unfortunate truth of the history is what Europeans had to trade wasn't material things. They would trade people. And so this is where a lot of Europeans were ended up in the slavery to Moors in terms of monetary gain, because slavery went both ways historically. And so this was what the history was. Moors went in and they basically taught, and they would trade material things for people.
No, that's understandable. I mean, how else are you going to get a workforce to build some of the great things that have been built throughout history? Obviously, it's
Well,
not.
no, the Moors didn't actually. The history is not really about the. So there was a difference between, like, say, modern slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, and then maybe this particular trade we're talking about, where Moors predominantly wanted women in their trade. There was, whereas the modern slave trade predominantly wanted male for the forced labor.
Right, for production.
That's what it was, for harems, pretty much. Like, it would be some wealthy sultan. It wasn't all Moors. It was like every person of Moorish descent just had a big harem, whatever. But those of wealth and notoriety were known to have hundreds or even thousands of concubines, and they would send people in to acquire them, and they would trade resources, knowledge, technology, and there were all other humanitarian interests that historically took place. Like, as I gave the bubonic plague example, which again, you weren't, as you're saying, you're not talking about the Scandinavian nations particularly, but that area of Europe that we were discussing earlier.
No, absolutely, yeah. They did go through it, and they went through it wrong, right? They weren't bathing. They thought it was the cats, so they killed all the cats, but it was actually the rats that was carrying this disease because the fleas were attached to the rats. They weren't bathing or cleaning, and yeah, that's what made it spread by wildfire for them.
But yeah, I didn't want to comment, because you had an original question about modern day, and I guess, how do we distinguish who are Moors? What do we say essentially to our people?
Right,
Those two
the
things?
rebuilding, I guess, of the the
Yeah,
Moorish Empire, right? So it was an empire. It was worldwide. The central location is lost, and now you guys are.
Well, yeah, we're not. Well,
Trying to
that's one thing.
rebuild.
We're not trying to restore the empire. That's not
No,
our
no,
objective at
not
all.
the empire, but at least restore influence. Like,
So I just want to share with you, from our holy text, a 3 verses, 3
yeah,
short
go ahead.
verses, if I may. This is out of our text called the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. It was divinely prepared by the man who we refer to and honor and acknowledge as Prophet Noble Drew Ali. He's the one who taught us about our nationality and restored our nationality, our heritage, our birthright, etc. And he stated in chapter 47, chapter 47 is entitled Egypt, the capital empire of the dominion of Africa. And in that chapter, verses 15 to 17, it states, the time has come when every nation must worship under its own vine and fig tree, and every tongue must confess his own. Through sin and disobedience, every nation has suffered slavery due to the fact that they honored not the creed and principles of their forefathers. That is why the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and colored was given to the Asiatics of America who were of Moorish descent, because they honored not the principles of their mother and father and strayed after the gods of Europe, of whom they knew nothing. So the real brief synopsis of what I just read is that our prophet is saying to us that we need, in this day and time, it was an era of slavery, but in this day and time, that we need to worship under our own vine and fig tree, which is our divine creed of Islamism, the principles of our forefathers. And our nationality of our people here in America was taken away from us during this era or period of slavery. And the words Negro, black, and colored. So that's how we can identify whose nationality needs to be restored. Because even those of Moorish descent in that time that we're talking about during the empire, they never lost their nationality in 1774. They don't fall in this category of the Asiatics of America who are of Moorish descent, because we will know who falls in that category because they have the name Negro, black, and colored attached to them, or they identify as such, and they have European last names on their names. Like, for example, your name is Parton. Now, your ancestors may have nothing to do with American slavery. We even go into the history of how there were so-called Black Americans who owned slaves in America during this particular period. So it's not even about that, but the name Parton could be shared by many so-called people who identify as Black through this particular period. And so they lost their nationality because their name wasn't Parton prior to this era. They didn't worship the gods of Christianity, or the God of Christianity, or gods depending on your particular perspective. They didn't have they didn't carry these names. They had a language, they had a flag, they had a landmass, they had a people. And so the Prophet Noble Drew Ali came in this particular period to restore our people, who are the only people in all of humanity who lack a proper national identity. Like, even when we asked you your nationality, you didn't say American, because clearly you're an American, but who's just a pure American? Like, what is just a pure American in terms of the constitutional construct of the United States of America? There's no such thing. Everybody has a national descent of which they came from, including the founding fathers. So that identity was taken away from those who are branded Negro, black, and colored. So we're not trying to restore a fallen Moorish empire. We're not trying to attach ourselves politically to that entity that no longer exists. We are citizens of the United States of America. But our Prophet Noble Drew Ali formed a theocracy under American law. And that is how we restored our particular nationality, or how our nationality was restored to us through the works of our Prophet Noble Drew Ali. So theocracy in the context of, as you can see, you know, the Catholic Church became a theocracy in under the Lateran Treaty in the year 1929. And so they utilized this particular Lateran Treaty. It was a negotiation between the Italian government and the papal and the Vatican, not the Vatican, the church, the Catholic Church. And then they formed themselves a government and were able to, within the geographical boundaries of Italy, be able to form themselves a government. But ours is not independent of the United States of America. We pledge allegiance to the United States of America, but have a limited capacity in terms of sovereignty under the constitutional construct that a body politic is allowed under that law, under the laws that we incorporate under, if that makes sense. So essentially what I was trying to say to kind of sum it all up is, in our literature, in our divine and holy scriptures, within our theocratic construct, within our divine constitution and bylaw, who is a Moorish American is clearly identified in that law. Acts 6, even in the even in our Moorish Quran, chapter 48, verse 6. So we have various different laws within our construct that identify specifically who we're going to. So anybody that Black, African American, Negro, colored, any period in history of American history, that's who qualifies as a Moorish American, who can proclaim their nationality through us. So, for example, it could be a person from modern day Morocco or a person from modern day Mauritania. They're not entitled to proclaim their nationality through us based on our historical connection, if that makes sense.
No, man, that absolutely makes sense.
That birthright is specifically for people with those brands identified.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, slavery did strip a lot of people of identity, I guess. So is that the goal of the American nation of Islam, is to establish identity, like a common identity, not just like, yeah, I'm a Black man or I'm a Black woman. It's no, you're not just that. Like you do have a history, you do have something beyond just being an American Black person, I guess you could say, or colored person, whatever the politically correct term is. It's to reestablish an identity, a common identity.
Well,
Exactly.
reestablish is a good word, because what I wanted to ensure that was understood is that there's a historical connection between the Moorish Science Temple of America and its members to the Moorish Empire, but the Moorish Science Temple of America is the Moorish Science Temple of America has a specific construct, and we're not attempting to reestablish the empire. That's not what we're trying to do among our people. But we're trying to restore them their nationality and their divine creed, which are two components of being recognized among the nations of men. And so that has been absent throughout history. So let me give you a more practical example of what is the intent behind it, why is it significant, and why our purpose is essential, is an essential function for our people. So prior to the birth of the Prophet Noble Ali, which was the year 1886, there was a man born by the name of Dred Scott. Now, Dred Scott was and I'm not going to presume that you don't know this, but just for the sake, I'm going to just give a synopsis of that particular case and then explain why I brought it up. Dred Scott was a man who was a slave. He was born into slavery. Now, remember, we were talking about the names and all that. Scott is not as an ancestral name, right? And he's one of those people who bore the brand Negro, right? As all of our ancestors did essentially in this meeting. So in this particular period, he was transported from a state that allowed slavery to a territory that didn't allow slavery. And I won't get into all the details. The master died, the white took in the court. We don't get into all those details. Point is, it goes before the Supreme Court. He attempts to sue for his slavery on the grounds that he was transported to this new territory. The slave master died. He was a free man. And when he went before the court, Supreme Court Justice Taney stated, in his opinion, the black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. But when we look at Federal Directive 15 and we look at the historicity of these particular terms, we come to find that they are political statuses. They have nothing to do with skin complexion. They have nothing to do with skin tone. So we could point to the case of the free sundry Moors that took place in South Carolina in the year 1790, prior to the adoption of the Naturalization Act. And these particular Moors were, make a long story short, they were in slavery illegally. They were, illegally captured, were brought aboard a ship, and just like this was this was basically a piracy, a legal form of slavery, human trafficking, internationally under that particular construct. And him and his people they were told they were going to be brought into Great Britain and they were going to be free, but then they were brought to Virginia and sold as slaves, something to that effect. And their case was brought before the highest state court. And they were freed, and they were to be treated under the laws that any other American citizen in that particular state would be treated under. And it was because of their political status. They were considered white, despite the fact that they were born on the continent of Africa and how they physically looked. And then in modern day, we have what's known as Federal Directive 15, which states something to the effect that these particular designations are not anthropological in nature. And the term white is defined as a person having in origins of any of the original people of Europe, the Middle East, quote unquote, which is a geopolitical term, in North Africa. So we have North Africans who are considered white. They come over here they could look as dark skinned as woolly haired and whatever. They come over here and they're federally classified as white.
So I have a question about that, if I may.
Mustafa,
I was going to go into that, but that was the very next thing I was going to. But for the sake of satisfying Steve's question, let's hear what he has to say.
Okay, no. I was just going to ask. So you're saying the term white and black isn't skin color based. It's basically whether you have rights or no rights. It's not if you're colored skin. Like obviously I'm not white. Like Jesus, I'm fucking red. Honestly, but what for your terms is white means you have full access to your rights, and black means you have limited access to rights. Is what I'm asking on that question.
Well, no, I'm saying that blacks have no rights at all, according to this particular court case. And but yeah, Muhammad, you were gonna say something? Since I'm sharing my screen, I think I'm sharing my screen. Am I sharing my screen?
Yeah, it's long.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the understanding, because according to the law, these terms do not have the colloquial meaning as people understand. This is where you have a difference between actual history and science. As he said, these terms are not anthropologically correct. They're not based off science. When you read the actual lettering of the law, it tells you this. Now, when you look at, as you were speaking of the skin, or what is called the integumentary system, it has certain layers to it. You have your melanin, which come from melanocytes. Every human on the planet has some degree of melanin, but some have more, some have less, depending on their region of origin. So this understanding of white and black as we use it as based on skin color is incorrect. But even to the lettering of the law, how we understand white and black is not correct. And when you're dealing with the status of black, is dealing with somebody who doesn't have secured rights. And when you're dealing with the status of white as it's pertaining to the lettering of law, is somebody who has secured rights based on how they record their self up, based on how they identify themselves politically. Islam.
Yeah,
Okay,
peace. Can you
that makes
just
sense.
1 second? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Islam, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you, bro.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
So
Islam.
I was referencing Federal Directive 15. As you can see, this is CDC.gov. Can you see that
Yeah.
at the top?
Yeah, bro.
Okay, so
I see it.
Office of Management and Budget, right? So this is the definitions well, basically race and ethnic standards for federal statistics and administrative reporting. So basically how people are classified and identified, right? And when we look at the second sentence, it says, these classifications should not be interpreted as being scientific or anthropological in nature, nor should they be viewed as determinants of eligibility for participation in the federal program. So what is that saying? This is just what we say the definition means, right? And here we go. We go down to where it says definitions. The basic racial and ethnic categories for federal statistics and program administrative reporting are defined as follows. So when we're talking about white and black, we see in category C, in category D, we have federal definitions for these terms. So for the term, it's black, it says a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. And then we have here white. A person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East. So that means we have Arabic people, like what they call Arab people, quote unquote. That's not a classification here, right? So that guy at the corner store in whatever ghetto or neighborhood, he's classified as white, even though he's brown skinned. He's clearly brown skinned. But according to his federal definition, he's classed as white because he's from the Middle East. So there was a court case, this man who was an Egyptian national. So this is North Africa, right? You have a lot of Pan-Africanists who fought in the 70s for Western academia to accept that that Egypt was in North Africa, but it was acknowledged that it was in North Africa. Okay, so this guy's a North African. He comes to America, he looks at the people they call black, and he look like him. Like he's brown skinned, got an afro, everything, right? You're not thinking Egyptian as soon as you see him. You might see him like that's some black man, right? So when he comes here, he tries to be classified as black or acknowledged as black through federal programs and stuff like that, as some of them do. They may want to apply for a college grant or something like that, and they want to check black. And the federal government says, no, sir, you're from Egypt. You're white. That's what they said to this man. And he's like, I'm looking in the mirror. I know I'm not white. Like, I'm not Caucasian. I'm not, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Like, I know what I am. And he takes it to court. And he appeals all the way up, and he loses. And as you see on my screen, this is the reason why he loses. It's because it's not based on science. It's not based on anthropology. It's not based on what you feel. We have said that North Africa is different from the black racial groups of Africa. So even though you're an Egyptian, you could trace yourself to the ancient Egyptians if you want to. According to our law, according to federal law, according to US law, you're white. So this is a reality that exists in terms of law that is almost Twilight Zone to what we perceive to be reality. And so this education, now when we look at history and we look at even American history, our people being branded as black had certain legal consequences, such as the Christian Black Codes of 1724, right? The Negro Act, the Buck Act, right? The Jim Crow laws, right? Segregation, all of these things, sundowns, all these things in law were regulating quote unquote black people, but people of the same phenotypical designation coming from somewhere else in the world were not subjugated to those based on US laws. But see, because we are ignorant to the actual history and what is actually documented and written, we believe we are black based on our phenotype. And we have nothing else in terms of international protections. So when George W. Bush or somebody affiliated with the executive family says that these people in Louisiana, in New Orleans, are refugees, even though their ancestors are traced to, they claim it's traced to the transatlantic slave trade, et cetera, they're supposed to be U.S. citizens. It's because they don't even have a nationality. And so getting back to the Dred Scott case, what essentially the findings was that Dred Scott, you have two issues. One, your property. And because you're property, you don't have a capacity to sue. Like, if a cow came into the courtroom and could talk, it doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here and listen to it, because you're chattel property, right? Chattel, French word, cattle. You're no different. You're livestock. Two, these are not the words in the case, obviously. It was used. I'm just using my own terminology for it. So if it's a bit abrasive, I apologize. I'm kind of very direct, blunt speaker. And the second capacity is that you were never naturalized as a citizen. So earlier we read the definition of nationality, and it came of two ways, right? It arises of two ways, either by birth, right, or through naturalization. And Black Americans were never formally naturalized as citizens. And we weren't born that either until the adoption of the 14th Amendment. It's another conversation. That whole birth, conversation, that's another conversation. But essentially, this is why, our prophet, in our view, was sent to us by Allah, because after the Civil War, we were supposed to be freed and made citizens. And that didn't transpire. They had the 15th Amendment that was passed to give us the right to vote, and we were still denied the right to vote through various means. And then the Voting Rights Act has to be passed. Well, if we have a constitutional amendment that we have a right to vote, then why does it have to be another act for us to have a right to vote? It's because of our capacity, of which, we don't fit within the constitutional construct, because we don't have a nationality and we don't have a divine creed. And all of the citizens who come over here must proclaim their nationality and their divine creed before the constitutional government of the United States of America. That's how it was set up. And we didn't go through that process. And so our prophet, to make us better citizens and restore us, this is the pathway by which he was set on from birth to resurrect our people as a dead nation.
So I guess again, that's the goal, is to create an identity for your.
I like restore. I like restore.
Yeah, it's
Restore,
not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Create or restore.
No, we're not creating, because this is who we are. We are what our forefathers are, without a doubt of contradiction. This nationality was taken away from us, like the Sheikh stated, in 1774 to 1865 during the times of slavery. We are descendants of the Moorish people, and we stripped of our identity. And by Prophet originally coming, he restored our identity back to us.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Bay, for saying create. I meant restore, right? Restore the identity, and it seems like it's flourishing from what you guys were talking about earlier and the debate you guys were having earlier between the different prophets and stuff. Obviously, there's different ideas on how to restore the identity. From what I was gathering from the debate, that's why I stayed quiet. I'm sorry, I just sat and listened. Um, my friend Amir invited me in here for the debate. Well, he didn't invite me specifically; he just threw out an open invitation, and I was like, all right. You know, I've known Amir for 20 years, so I'd like to hear and see. That's all.
Well, yeah, Steve. I definitely appreciate you, coming on our meeting. A lot of people, they don't understand our particular teachings and our perspective, and it's very noble of you to actually come to inquire and try to see what it's about. We are here and we sit here directly for our people, but our overall objective in terms of our divine creed and our way of life and what we want to promote is the uplifting of fallen humanity, and our teachings are to be universal. So our prophet was sent here specifically for our people in the ways that the prophet Jesus was sent, as is stated in the Holy Bible, that he was sent for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, our prophet was sent for us as lost sheep to restore us to the ways of the Most High, of our ancestors and our divine creed. And so, we allow our platform to be public. And so anybody is more than welcome. It doesn't matter your nationality, your ethnic background, your religious viewpoints. Everybody's more than welcome to attend our meetings, ask questions, and we extend that forum because we want the not just our people, but the general American public to be familiar with our prophet Noble Drew Ali and his teachings and his principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice.
Yeah. No, bro, I appreciate it. Like I said, I've known you for like 20 years, man, and now I am in a position of leadership. My first class, man. I got people from all over the place that I lead, man. 30, 40 people a day, every day. It's just military, man. So I do like to hear and experience and understand what other cultures are doing or are fighting for or against. I love hearing that stuff, man. And again, I don't fully understand Moorish culture, unfortunately. I don't. I do and have learned a lot from my friend Amir over the past 20 years, but it doesn't mean that I understand everything. So I'm sorry if my questions seem, I don't know, like
No, they was good questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Steve is, like as he said, he's a really good friend, and I didn't want to give too much of his personal information out because I never ceased the recording, so I didn't want to put any of his personal information out there. But like I said, he's a very good friend. Our teachings have no there's a lot of perceptions, among organizations, among our people that have a racist sentiment. Our teachings have none of that. Our principles, our core tenets, we keep them pretty pure and pretty public. And so there's nothing we teach in private that we don't teach in public, and that's why we welcome everybody to come into our meetings. Again, we want to propagate our particular teachings, around the world.
Yeah, man. So, I mean, if you guys do this again, I'll absolutely jump in.
Right. I also wanted to say to you, we have a YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is entitled Brooklyn Moors. There's dozens of videos on there that you could actually kind of get more familiarized.
I think I've seen you post some of those.
Yeah, so you might be able to go through the feed.
I've seen some of you talk, you Amir, talking in some of those.
Those are real those are good constitutional and historical lessons right there. You get a lot of jewels out of that. But so you could also
some of those, and I've also seen, what was it? Maybe it was a couple years back when you guys were fighting the courts for the right of nationality. I think it was. when you were fighting the court?
Oh yeah, well, we always, as we say, we stand on our square. So, we anytime we feel that our, divine rights are being molested or, whatever, we, as any other American citizens entitled under the First Amendment, we petition our government for redress of grievances. And so, as lawful abiding citizens, that's how we navigate in terms of protecting our constitutional rights.
And then,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm in the military and stuff, but has any one of you considered being a Morris chaplain? There's one in the Navy right now. He's an 04 lieutenant commander. I can't remember his name right now. He is a Morris chaplain in the United States Navy. Lieutenant commander.
We'll talk about that.
He designed y'all's insignia. Actually, he designed it because he's the only one.
Well, me and Sheikh Tunde Rael, we're chaplains. We have our chaplain certifications, but we're not currently being active in that particular office right now. But we are chaplains, though.
I was just curious if that was another thing.
Yeah, I wanted to add
reach out
to
that community and spread the wealth of knowledge that way as well. Because chaplains do that. But the thing is, they have to be super unbiased and have to have a basic knowledge of all religions.
right.
I just didn't know that. I know of one, and he's the only one that is a Moorish chaplain. And I just didn't know if that was another thing for outreach, is to promote someone to like, hey man,
Well, I want to reach out to you in private on that, because I'd like to get some more information about this Moorish chaplain and trying to pick your brain on that. Our Grand Sheikh Richardson Dingle L, one of our forefathers, who we call the reincarnated prophet in the third form. He instituted before he instituted that, he was a member of the U.S. military, and his part of correcting his records from Negro to white went through the military. And he corrected his military records as well as his records within the state of his domicile. So he was actually a military man.
Yeah, I was showing, my chaplain identification that me and Sheikh Tunde Sadara.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
we can see
I
it. We can see
my
it.
man. I see it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Steve, do you have any other questions before we, I guess, close out, this unofficial portion?
No, I don't. Unless anyone has any questions for me, I guess.
Well, like I said, I do have some, but I'll talk to you in private about that, pertaining to, once again, I want to learn more about the Moorish chaplain and his function and things of that nature. But other than that, I want to allow the brothers, because we actually went beyond an hour, and I wanted to kind of extend that courtesy to you. Once again, we've known each other for such a long period of time. I wanted to, extend that courtesy to you, and my brothers appease me in that regard, but I want to allow them to enjoy their Sunday. And if you have any further questions, this is a weekly meeting. We meet every Sunday from 12:30 to 3 p.m. So if it's, on a particular Sunday, maybe we might have something going on as today, but, it might be a Sunday something's not going on, or even towards the end of the meeting, we always try to afford some time for people to ask questions, which we did for you today. We try to do that, and we encourage people to come on our platform and to ask these kinds of questions. So you're more than welcome to return to our meetings. They're reoccurring. The same link that's on the Facebook today, it'll work next week and the following Sunday, et cetera, as well as any, body that's, potentially watching this in the future or whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter who you are, where you're from. You're welcome to attend our Zoom meetings and, build with the Sheiks of the Moorish Science of America. Once again, I'd like to thank you, Steve. Thank you so much, brother.
No problem, bro. I appreciate you guys for having me.
All right, peace.
All right, Moors. Yo, y'all go in peace. Steve, go in peace, man.
Well,
You guys take
peace.
care.
All right. You guys have a good day, man.
All right,
You
peace.